Welcome to True Echo, where untold stories of resilience, justice, and redemption are brought to life. Today's story isn't just about injustice. It's about the moment power meets resistance, and loses. In a small southern town where everyone knew their place, one woman refused to stay silent. Stay tuned. Selena Cole stepped out of the black SUV and inhaled deeply. The scent of pine, damp soil, and nostalgia filled her lungs like a forgotten song. It had been 15 years since she'd last stood in Evergrove, Georgia, but the town hadn't changed. Time had brushed past it, leaving only sun-faded paint and brittle edges. She gazed at the sprawling colonial estate in front of her. It wasn't just a house. It was legacy, hers. Nestled on the edge of 60 acres of private forest, the estate had once belonged to her grandparents. She still remembered chasing fireflies barefoot through the trees, her grandmother's laughter echoing through the warm summer dusk. Selena hadn't come here for sentiment, though. She was here to breathe, not from grief, not from fear, but from exhaustion. After selling her cybersecurity firm for over $400 million and fending off lawsuits from former partners who couldn't stand to see a black woman win, she needed a reset. And she wasn't going to find it in penthouse suites or glass boardrooms. She had come to the woods. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out the deed, and looked at the bold signature at the bottom. Calvin Ross. The man who had owned the estate before her. Every inch of it was now hers, legally, fully, irrevocably. The land. The trees. Even the forgotten trail that wound behind the property. So when the knock came, sharp, entitled, 3 precise raps, she knew instinctively it wasn't friendly. Selena opened the door to a woman in a pale blue pantsuit whose smile was polished, rehearsed, and colder than the December wind. 2 khaki-uniformed men loitered behind her, arms folded, silent. "Miss Cole," the woman said sweetly. "Grace Whitmore. Mayor of Evergrove." "I know who you are," Selena said, her voice cool and even. "Word travels fast when someone like you moves into our little town," Grace chuckled, brushing back her silver blonde hair. "Just wanted to welcome you, and remind you that the forest behind this home has always been open to the public. It's used for hikes, wellness walks. We'd hate for that tradition to stop." "It's private land," Selena replied, eyes unwavering. "I own it." Grace's smile tightened. "Well, legally, perhaps. But around here, we value shared space. Community values, you know." "I value boundaries," Selena said flatly. The mask cracked. Grace's smile faltered, just for a breath. Then she recovered, stepping back. "Let me know if you need anything. We're a close-knit town, Miss Cole. We keep an eye on each other." Selena nodded. "I'm good at watching, too." As the mayor turned and walked off, the gravel crunched under her heels like breaking glass. The truck pulled away, kicking up dust in its wake. Selena closed the door gently, locking it. Then leaned against the frame, staring out at the woods. That wasn't a welcome, she whispered to herself. That was a claim. And if Grace Whitmore thought she could intimidate Selena Cole, billionaire, CEO, survivor, she was about to be gravely mistaken. 2 mornings later, the cold air stung Selena's cheeks as she stepped off the back porch, her grandfather's old hunting rifle slung across her back. She walked slowly, deliberately, each step crunching into frost-covered grass. Mist curled along the edge of the woods like the breath of some ancient beast, but Selena didn't flinch. These trees had once been her sanctuary. And today, they would be again. She had checked her permits twice before setting out. Everything was in order: hunting license, landowner permission, even the county's outdated map confirming the boundary lines. She wasn't here to shoot game for fun. She was here to reclaim something that had been chipped away from her since the day she'd made her first million, peace on her own terms. She moved through the forest like memory, quiet, practiced, unhurried. When she reached the dry creek bed Calvin Ross had described in his email, she crouched behind a fallen log. The rifle was steady in her hands. A young buck stepped cautiously into view, nostrils flaring. Selena inhaled slowly, aimed, and fired. The shot echoed once, then silence returned. She approached the fallen animal with the respect her grandfather had taught her, not triumph, but thanks. She reached for her gloves and field dressing kit, but a sudden rustling from the trail behind her made her freeze. Footsteps. Heavy. Purposeful. Selena turned, wiping her hands on a cloth, and slung the rifle safely behind her. Through the trees, a group appeared, led by none other than Mayor Grace Whitmore. She was dressed in sparkling new hiking gear, flanked by 3 residents with matching jackets and judgment in their eyes. Grace stopped cold when she saw Selena. Then, with the exaggerated horror of a performer, she gasped. "Oh my God! She's out here killing animals." Selena said nothing. She didn't flinch. Grace pulled out her phone and began recording. "This is a protected community area," she announced, loudly enough for the camera. "You can't just bring weapons and hunt where children walk." Selena raised her phone calmly and scrolled to Calvin's email. "This is private land," she replied coolly. "I have permission." "You're trespassing." Grace didn't even blink. "Don't try it. This trail has been used by Evergrove families for 20 years. That makes it common property." "Is that what your law books say?" Selena said softly, "or just what you tell people too afraid to ask questions?" The other hikers glanced between them, unsure who to believe. Grace's smile faltered again. "This is about safety," she snapped. "There's a woman with a gun in the woods. Our community deserves protection." Selena's tone remained even, but the steel underneath it was unmistakable. "You're not here for safety. You're here to lay groundwork. For something bigger." Grace blinked. Just for a second. And in that second, Selena saw the truth. This wasn't about a trail. This was about control. And Grace wasn't expecting resistance, certainly not from a woman like her. "You're making a mistake," Grace said under her breath as she stepped closer. "You may have money, Miss Cole. You may even think you have power. But in this town, we decide who belongs and who doesn't." Selena didn't move. "Good," she said. "Because I've never cared about belonging." She turned, packed her gear, and walked away without a backward glance. By the time she got home, her phone had already pinged 3 times. News spread fast in Evergrove. The mayor had filed a formal complaint against her, citing reckless behavior, public endangerment, and unauthorized hunting on public trails. The fine? $8,000. Due in 30 days. Selena stood on her porch, the citation trembling slightly in her hand. Not from fear. From fury. She poured herself a glass of water and opened her laptop. She wasn't unfamiliar with tactics like this. Grace Whitmore was just another in a long line of people who mistook kindness for weakness, and silence for submission. But what Grace didn't know, what she couldn't possibly understand, was that Selena Cole had made a career out of dismantling men with corner offices and razor-sharp smiles. And she had done it all without raising her voice. Now she would do the same here. The forest hadn't changed. But Selena had. And Grace Whitmore had just made her last mistake. Selena didn't sleep much that night. She sat at the old oak kitchen table, the same one her grandmother used to polish every Sunday after church, and began drafting an email to her attorney in Atlanta. Julia Monroe had helped her navigate multi-million-dollar acquisitions, shareholder lawsuits, and even a slander case against a major news outlet. This small-town political stunt? It wouldn't even register as a blip. The email was precise, measured. Selena attached a copy of the fine, the citation letter, the trail permit, and the deed to the land, 60 acres, properly recorded, signed, notarized. She also attached a photo of the group trespassing that morning, just in case things needed to escalate. She didn't want to go to war. But she never let herself get ambushed either. The reply came within hours. Julia was direct, "They're bluffing. But it's not just about the fine. They're setting you up for something bigger. Don't pay it. Let's dig." Selena closed the laptop, staring out the kitchen window into the black silhouette of the woods. She could feel it now, the undercurrent, the quiet scheming. Grace wasn't just posturing. She was building something. A case. A movement. Maybe even a takeover. The kind where you mobilize a community against a single target and call it democracy. The next morning, Selena drove into town and parked outside the county courthouse, a two-story brick building with cracked windows and weeds curling around the foundation. The clerk behind the glass barrier looked surprised when she requested copies of any recent land use proposals involving the surrounding parcels. An hour later, the manila folder was slid under the glass with a thin-lipped smile. Selena opened it the moment she got back to her SUV. Inside, proposal for Evergrove Legacy Park. Sponsor, Mayor Grace Whitmore. Budget, $2.4 million. Location, 58 acres behind Willow Creek Road. Amenities included playgrounds, wellness trails, a meditation garden, and, most notably, an open-air amphitheater that straddled her private property. Her land. Her forest. And nowhere in the application was her name. Nowhere was there any signed consent. Nowhere was there any mention of ownership. Selena sat back in her seat, letting the reality settle over her like a winter fog. The town wasn't confused. It wasn't mistaken. It was actively building on a lie. A fantasy. One that only worked if she didn't resist. If she folded. If she paid the fine and disappeared into the woods. But she wasn't built that way. On the drive home, her mind churned with precision. This wasn't about hunting anymore. It was about erasure. The town had quietly fundraised for years, she realized, bake sales, charity marathons, community wellness drives. And all that money funneled into a development that was both illegal and fraudulent. She arrived back at the estate to find a woman standing on the edge of her porch, wringing her hands around a canvas tote. Sarah Jennings. A local teacher. Selena recognized her from old family photos. The woman had taught at Evergrove Elementary when her mother was just a girl. "Miss Cole," Sarah said, lowering her voice. "You didn't hear this from me, but there's going to be a town meeting next Thursday. They're calling it a community safety forum. But it's about you. About the land." Selena's pulse slowed, sharpened. "Thank you for telling me." Sarah hesitated. "Grace, she doesn't lose well. Be careful." Selena nodded. "Neither do I." As Sarah disappeared down the gravel path, Selena stood rooted on the porch. She didn't feel threatened. She felt focused. Grace was setting the stage, and next week, she planned to make Selena the villain in her own town. But villains don't show up with evidence. They don't bring receipts. And they don't drag sunshine into shadows. Selena poured herself another black coffee and pulled up the grant records online. It took hours of sifting, but when she found the contracts, her breath hitched. One stood out, $75,000 already paid to a landscaping firm based in Athens, Georgia. The owner's last name? Whitmore. Selena took a screenshot and emailed Julia. The response came fast. "It's fraud. We've got them. Let them speak first. Then we speak louder." That night, Selena stepped out onto her porch and stared out at the trees. The wind whispered through the branches like it remembered every secret this land had ever held. Her grandmother's laugh. Her grandfather's rifle. Her mother's quiet tears the day they left. She had come here to rest. But now she was here to remind them whose land this was. The town meeting was scheduled for 6 p.m. sharp at Evergrove's modest town hall, a building that had once been a schoolhouse before being converted into a venue for city council meetings and seasonal bake-offs. On the night of the forum, the air felt electric, heavy with anticipation. The sun dipped below the horizon like a warning light going out. Selena stood before her mirror, smoothing the lapel of her dark gray blazer. Understated, firm. No jewelry, no flash. Just presence. She pinned her hair back with practiced grace, tucked her folder of documents under her arm, and left the house with a calm that belied the storm inside her. She didn't need to prepare a speech. She had facts. And facts didn't tremble. When she arrived, the parking lot was already packed. Pickup trucks lined the edges. Town residents stood in clusters, whispering, pointing as she stepped onto the cracked sidewalk leading to the double doors. Some nodded politely. Others looked at her like she was a virus. Unwelcome. Dangerous. Powerful. Selena didn't flinch. Inside, the town hall buzzed like a beehive on the edge of collapse. The wooden benches were filled, the standing room near the back already full. Parents, retirees, business owners, they were all there, whipped into a frenzy by weeks of whispered rumors and passive-aggressive flyers titled, "Who Really Owns Evergrove?" At the front of the room stood Grace Whitmore, radiant in a cream blazer and pearl earrings, projecting the image of humble leadership. Beside her stood the county sheriff, his face unreadable, his stance unnervingly still. Selena took a seat in the back row, folder resting on her lap. Grace stepped up to the podium and tapped the microphone. The room hushed. "Good evening, friends," she began, her tone syrupy with concern. "Thank you all for coming out tonight. It warms my heart to see so many of you engaged in protecting the values that make Evergrove what it is." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. "As many of you know," she continued, eyes scanning the crowd like a preacher mid-sermon, "the trails behind Willow Creek have been part of our lives for generations. We've walked those paths, held weddings in the grove, taught our children about nature on those very grounds." Selena listened, her face unreadable. "Unfortunately," Grace said, her voice now tinged with sadness, "recent changes in property ownership have jeopardized that tradition. What was once ours is now behind padlocks and posted signs. It's time we act, together." The murmurs became rumbles. "That is why," Grace announced, lifting a sheet of paper, "I and the council have voted to approve emergency proceedings to secure the disputed land under eminent domain. For the good of Evergrove." Applause broke out. Shouts of "Save our trail" began to echo from the front rows. Selena rose slowly. The room quieted again, but now it was the stillness of a collective breath being held. She walked toward the podium with a calm born not of arrogance, but clarity. She stopped a few steps away, folder in hand. Grace's smile wavered for the first time. "My name is Selena Cole," she said, voice calm, commanding. "And I am the legal owner of the land you're all discussing." A hush fell over the room like a dropped curtain. "I purchased the property from Calvin Ross directly," Selena continued, opening her folder. "Here is the signed deed. Property taxes paid in full. I also have documentation proving that the town never had permission to use the trails. Calvin never granted it. This land was never public." The silence turned into discomfort. "I hold a legal hunting permit and written authorization from the previous owner. Everything done on that land was lawful, what wasn't was the unauthorized use by the town, including the current development project filed under the name Evergrove Legacy Park." She lifted another document, her voice unwavering. "Here is the grant application filed with the state. And here," she said, turning another page, "is the evidence showing a payment of $75,000 from town funds to a landscaping firm owned by Mayor Whitmore's brother. No public record. No transparency. No consent." Gasps. Murmurs of, "Wait, what? Her brother? That's not right." The sheriff shifted where he stood. Grace's face paled, her lips twitching into a frozen smile that no longer reached her eyes. Selena finished, "If you proceed with eminent domain, I will respond with a lawsuit for illegal seizure, fraud, and public corruption. And I will win. And your taxes will pay for it." The room erupted. Some people shouted in support, others in confusion. The chant didn't return. Instead, the energy fractured, spiraling into arguments between neighbors, accusations flying in every direction. Grace pounded the podium, trying to regain control. "She's lying," she screamed. "She doesn't care about this town. She's here to destroy it." Selena didn't even raise her voice. "I came here to rest," she said. "But you came here to steal." And then she walked away, leaving the folder on the podium for anyone who wanted to see. Outside, the stars were out. Cold and sharp. Selena closed her coat, walked to her car, and exhaled. Inside, the house lights of Evergrove were starting to flicker in realization. Selena sat at her kitchen table the next morning, a chipped ceramic mug of black coffee cradled in her hands. The silence in the house was different now. It wasn't peace, exactly, not yet, but it was the eye of a storm she had cracked wide open. Her phone buzzed beside her. A text from Julia Monroe, her attorney, blinked across the screen. "It's done. Documents filed. The state has received everything." Selena smiled faintly. Julia didn't waste words. The eminent domain filing was now being legally contested, and the evidence of fraudulent grant applications, along with the questionable $75,000 payout, had been formally submitted to the state attorney general's office. That was no longer just a local issue. It was about to become a very public one. The mayor had crossed the wrong woman. By noon, the quiet little town of Evergrove was anything but. 2 news vans from Atlanta had parked outside the old diner. Camera crews roamed the streets like tourists on assignment, knocking on doors, chasing soundbites. Residents who had once smiled politely at Selena now turned their faces away, not out of contempt, but uncertainty. The narrative was shifting. Fast. Selena didn't go out. She didn't need to. Her truth was already in motion. From her front window, she watched as 2 plainclothes investigators entered town hall with briefcases in hand. Grace Whitmore had disappeared from the public eye since last night's debacle, but her fingerprints were all over the fraudulent paper trail. Every signature, every vendor receipt, every check. Selena hadn't just exposed her, she had flipped the table. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the pines, Selena received a call she didn't expect. John Weaver. A longtime resident, former city planner, and someone who had once helped Selena's grandfather install fencing along the forest line. "I'd like to talk," his gravelly voice said. "In person." They met on her porch, both sipping tea as the cicadas began their low, droning hum. John held a battered manila folder, thick with notes and yellowed clippings. "I believed her," he admitted, not looking at her. "We all did. Grace said she'd revitalize the town, protect what mattered. She said the land deal was just a formality. That no one lived here. That you were some absentee tech investor." Selena remained silent. John continued. "But I should have known. She always talked about tradition, about unity. But it was always on her terms. Anyone who didn't fit into her vision was a threat." He handed her the folder. "What's this?" "Everything I could find about her campaign finances, vendor contracts, backdoor land appraisals. This whole park development. It was never for the community. It was for control. And a legacy." Selena opened the folder and scanned the documents. The paper was old, but the truth was fresh, and damning. "She used us," John said, voice thick with shame. "And we let her." Selena closed the folder slowly. "Then help me make it right." The next morning, Selena submitted everything John had given her to Julia. By afternoon, it was in the hands of a state investigator. That same day, whispers turned into open conversations. On Facebook groups. On front porches. In grocery store aisles. Did you see the payout to her brother? She never had permission to use that land. She told us it was donated. The next night, another town meeting was called, this time by the town council, without Grace. The mood was tense, electric. Residents packed the building and spilled onto the lawn. Reporters circled like sharks. Selena stood quietly near the back, blending in with the shadows. Grace entered late, her presence brittle. Her once commanding presence now felt like an old balloon, deflated, still trying to float. She stood at the podium and attempted to speak, but this time the murmurs didn't die down. The people weren't there to listen. They were there to confront. John Weaver stood. "Mayor Whitmore," he said, holding up the same folder he'd given Selena. "Did you or did you not knowingly file a grant application on land you didn't own?" The room fell to a hush. Grace opened her mouth. "I acted on what I believed to be in the community's best interest," she said, shaky but defiant. "Mistakes may have been made." "Mistakes?" shouted a woman near the front. "You lied." Another voice rose, "You promised my son's school a new garden from that grant." The sheriff, who had stood silently through previous meetings, stepped forward. "Mayor Whitmore," he said formally, "based on the evidence now under review by the state and in light of this community's outcry, I'm advising you to resign. Effective immediately." Gasps. Someone whispered, "It's over." Grace's face twisted. Anger. Desperation. For a moment, it looked like she might explode, that she might try to claw her way back into control with sheer arrogance. But then she deflated, one slow breath at a time. She reached up and unclipped her mayoral pin. It dropped onto the podium with a metallic clink that echoed across the chamber like a funeral bell. And just like that, she turned and walked out. No applause. No cheers. Just silence. A reckoning. Selena stepped outside into the cool night air, breathing deeply. Not with triumph. Not even with relief. But with finality. It was done. But what came next was even more important. The days following Grace Whitmore's resignation were unlike anything Evergrove had seen in decades. With the mayor gone and a formal investigation underway, the town found itself caught in a strange limbo. Local news stations camped out near Town Hall. Journalists wandered the streets, hungry for quotes. The town's facade of small-town innocence had shattered, and beneath it was something messier, rawer, truth. Selena kept to herself. She didn't gloat, didn't give interviews, didn't strut. She walked into the grocery store just like everyone else. She bought her eggs and milk. She nodded politely to strangers and smiled gently when people stopped mid-aisle, hesitating between apology and admiration. Some couldn't meet her eyes. Some did, and with gratitude. One afternoon, she stepped outside her home to find a small basket on her porch, fresh tomatoes, wildflowers, and a handwritten card. It read, simply, "We were wrong. Thank you for standing." She didn't need a name to know it came from someone who had once clapped during Grace's speech. Later that week, the town council announced a special election to choose a new mayor. For the first time in decades, there were multiple candidates, not hand-picked successors. Not friends of Grace. Actual contenders. A retired school principal. A local nurse. Even John Weaver was rumored to be considering a run. The ripple effect was everywhere. But Selena wasn't interested in politics. Not even in influence. What she wanted, and what she fought for, was truth. And now that truth had space to breathe. Still, she knew she wasn't done. Because buried beneath the town's relief and reflection was something deeper, a quiet question of what to do now. The land, the forest, the trails, they were still hers. And though she had won the battle against corruption, there was still healing to be done. So she made a decision. That weekend, she contacted Julia and had her draft a legal agreement. It was a simple document. A community access plan. One that would allow supervised, registered groups to use a portion of the woods for nature walks, school programs, and events. No politics, no claims. Just peace. The agreement would include liability waivers, strict boundaries, and an educational partnership with Evergrove Elementary. That Sunday, she walked into the same town hall where Grace had tried to destroy her and requested time to speak at the next meeting. The night arrived, quiet and cool. The crowd was smaller than before, not tense, not angry, just curious. The town was still licking its wounds, but it was ready to listen again. Ready to rebuild. Selena stepped up to the same podium she had once turned into a courtroom. She looked out at the faces before her. Some familiar. Some new. I came here, she began, because I needed space. Not just from the world, but from everything success had cost me. I came here to rest. And instead, I was challenged. A murmur ran through the room. No one interrupted. And though that challenge came wrapped in hostility, it reminded me of something important, that justice is never just about defending what's yours. It's about making sure no one else has to fight the same battle alone. She held up the signed agreement. I am not donating my land. I am not giving it away. But I am offering something better. Partnership. Boundaries and access. Shared respect. Let the children walk the trails with their teachers. Let the scouts camp under the stars, with permission, with safety, and with understanding that ownership is not always the enemy of community. For a moment, silence reigned. Then came the sound of clapping. Slow, uncertain at first, then louder. Some stood. Some wept. Not because they had lost, but because they finally understood that they had almost lost something precious to their own ignorance. And because Selena, when she could have walked away and left them to flounder, chose something harder, grace. As the meeting ended, people approached her in waves, to thank her, to shake her hand, to apologize. But she didn't soak in the spotlight. She answered gently, nodded often, and left quietly, slipping into the night like a guardian returning to the trees. Back home, she sat on the porch, the stars winking through the pine canopy above. She listened to the owls. To the rustling leaves. To the land. It was hers. And now, it was also something more. A place of reckoning. A place of change. And, finally, a place of peace. Weeks passed, and Evergrove began to look different, not because the buildings changed or the roads were repaved, but because the people moved differently. Conversations in coffee shops were no longer laced with suspicion or whispered behind cupped hands. Instead, there was acknowledgement. Growth. A town finally learning how to look itself in the mirror. Selena Cole became a presence, not a spectacle. She declined invitations to join the town council and turned down a lucrative book deal from a New York publisher who wanted to turn her story into a scandalous exposé. That wasn't her purpose. She didn't want to be a brand. She wanted to breathe. So she did. She spent mornings walking the edge of the forest with a notebook in hand, mapping out spaces where the community programs could flourish, and where they couldn't. She hired a local contractor to rebuild the old Trailhead Bridge and paid the invoice herself without a press release. Children from Evergrove Elementary took their first hike through the forest under the new agreement 2 weeks later. Their laughter sounded exactly like her own had at that age, breathless, free, unburdened. But Selena knew one thing: history must be recorded, not rewritten. So, one quiet afternoon, she made a choice of her own. She visited the town's library, a modest red brick building across from the old diner. Inside, she asked to speak with the head librarian and requested a public records donation. A thick envelope containing copies of the fraudulent grant applications, the land deed, the community access agreement, and a written summary of the entire ordeal, not from a place of vengeance, but for transparency. Let this sit on a shelf, she told the librarian, so that 20 years from now, when someone wants to know how Evergrove changed, they'll find it wasn't because of a scandal. It was because someone said no. And meant it. The librarian nodded, eyes misty. You're the kind of story people try to erase. Which is why I'm writing it down, Selena replied. That evening, as she sat by the fireplace with a cup of tea and the scent of cedar drifting through the house, her phone rang. It was Sarah Jennings, the teacher who'd warned her weeks ago. I thought you'd want to know, she said, her voice lighter than before. The new mayor just got elected. Selena smiled. Who? John Weaver. Won by a landslide. She chuckled quietly. Good choice. Sarah paused. He says you gave this town a second chance. Whether it deserved one or not. Selena didn't respond right away. She stared out the window where the trees swayed gently in the evening breeze. No, she said softly. The town gave itself that chance. I just refused to be quiet while it decided. They spoke a little longer, about school programs, the new community garden, and the mural being painted downtown featuring scenes from Evergrove's past, present, and future. When she hung up, Selena opened her laptop. Not to check the news, not to draft legal memos. But to write. She began with one line. In a quiet town shadowed by secrets, one woman returned, not to make history, but to stop it from repeating. She paused, then continued typing, not for the world, not even for YouTube. But for herself. The next morning, she rose with the sun, pulled on her boots, and headed back into the forest. The trail was clear. The frost glinted like silver thread. Every branch, every stone, every breath felt like home. She had come here to find peace. What she found instead was her voice. And once she spoke, Evergrove would never forget it. Sometimes, justice doesn't come with flashing lights or loud applause. Sometimes, it comes quietly, through truth, through resilience, and through one voice refusing to back down. Selena Cole didn't just stand her ground. She changed it. Let this be a reminder, when someone tries to erase your story, you don't just speak, you write the ending yourself. If this story moved you, subscribe to True Echo for more powerful tales of courage, truth, and redemption. Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to pass this story on, because someone else may need to hear it today.